Hello and welcome to Pardon the Interception with myself, Lee.
You got me, Conrad. Hi, guys.
Me, Nick. Hello.
And we now have 2 weeks of the Gridiron season 32 down. We're starting to dial things in a little bit. For those of you that are waiting, we will get on to our most anticipated segment, Stromwatch, later on in the show. But to begin with, let's take a look at the GFL.
So the GFL. Last week, I was primarily talking about games where it was an absolute drubbing and particular players or coaches just smashed their opposition. I'll take a bit of a different tack this week and maybe think a bit more about some of the close games, of which there were many this week. So how about the Calgary Bulls and the Columbus Cannons, which was decided by a 1-point margin? It was kind of a basement battle. Both teams were looking to get off the mark and get their first win for the season. And it was fairly low scoring game, although the Bulls did manage to produce a touchdown in all of the quarters after the first. I think the main thing to point out here is that it's good to see teams that maybe are sitting a little bit more towards the bottom end of their respective divisions slugging it out and doing their best to get some points on the board. We're a bit more used perhaps in the Atlantic to teams sometimes just being willing to throw in the towel either after week one or just before the season even starts, saying, you know what, I don't really care about scoring points this season, I'll see you next time. But clearly both the Bulls and the Cannons looking to try and put up some points, narrowly decided in the end by just that single point. It was Gary Line explains it a little bit here in the comments that it was a late drive. The Cannons were looking to try and get back into the game in Q4. They did have to settle for a field goal on 4 and 6, probably because the AI didn't kick in and tell them to go for it, thinking that they still had a few minutes to try and recover possession. But then, of course, the Bulls just held onto it with their running game and left so little time by the time they gave it back to the Cannons that they just couldn't score again. So lesson there, and possibly in that the AI has got them a bit there, but also a bit of an unexpected or challenging move from the Bulls to keep possession. So that's a pretty interesting one.
And one thing to bear in mind with the AI there, when people want to play around with it a little bit, the advanced tab in game planning is a very, very powerful tool, but it's also something to very easily mess up your entire team with. So if you are going to start playing around with the percentages and numbers there, I recommend reading through the rules to make sure you know 100% what it is you are trying to do.
Don't push your field goal percentage up to 80 because you'll never kick a field goal again. Second game to point out, and I think I'm going to do 3 from the GFL. For the second one, I'd like to have a look at, there's another one of the close games. Scapa Flow Dreadnoughts and Boston Pirates. Again, I do love a defensive slugfest where the defenses are on top and you really have to fight and grind your attempts to get those yards out. Both teams, of course, claiming here to be in a rebuild, but both teams still putting points on the board. Boston a little bit shambolic with their 7 turnovers, still eking out the win and taking themselves to 2-0. So good job, Boston Pirates. So you can't really claim to be in much of a rebuild if you're already 2 up at this stage of the season. Wish I was 2 up at this stage of the season. Interesting point from this game is Boston minus 21 rushing yards, which is a little disappointing from the running game. Thankfully, their passing game made up for it.
I did see that earlier, actually. I made a note of it. 16 carries for minus 21 yards is somewhat impressive, yeah.
Do we think their running backs didn't know which way to run down the field and they were just being tackled for loss by the quarterback immediately after the handoff?
I think it was more down to a classic Pirates coming up against a Dreadnought and losing that battle. Or are we talking Gridiron? Sorry.
They tried to board but failed.
Indeed.
And I guess the other one I'd like to talk about is a bit more up the high end of the rarefied heights of the GFL, which is Rindwraiths and Tuscany Raiders billed as the Master versus the Apprentice, with Coach Dave Russell up against Coach Tim Collier. it's Rind don't lose many games, I think, is if you want a quick snapshot of what the GFL is like. The Rind rates very, very rarely lose. So even just to get within 3 points of them is something of an achievement, notwithstanding whether you're away from home or not. Here, Leah's bringing up his career record of Dave Ross's career record of 44 losses as compared to his nearly 350 wins.
It's 350 with this win, because this would have been before the game.
There you go. So yeah, not too shabby a win percentage. But Tim Collier's team is looking good this season. I mean, you can definitely say it's looking good as a result of this. Unfortunately, of course, didn't get the big W at home. But you've got to be encouraged, I think, if you can put up some significant points and keep it close against the Wraiths. Run game is particularly satisfying probably for the Raiders at this stage. Pass game was a bit patchy, but at least they didn't throw any picks. So more to be expected from the Raiders. I think we can probably expect to be seeing them in the playoffs.
Okay. Nick, anything else from the G before we move on to the A?
I only had a few notes more than anything with G. The Emperor's Firebirds game was quite an interesting one because was it the quarterback Lily? Just had some interesting stats of 7 interceptions thrown.
Team record.
Yep, but still has a quarterback rating of 70, so still did a reasonable job the rest of the time. So I thought that was an interesting one because actually the Firebirds look like they might be able to maybe string some wins together as well this season. So might be one just to keep an eye on if you're looking for someone a little bit different to look at this season.
Yeah, Les Walker, one of the OG's original Gridiron GFL coaches from the very, very beginning, I think. So,
and the other impressive performance was the Breakers wide receiver Muzzy, who I think 491 yards.
Whoa, on one player.
Yes, 491 yards, an average of 30.7 yards per reception, which that takes some doing. And not to mention the opposing wide receiver also getting 300 yards in that game. So that was a real aerial battle right there.
Definitely a deserved MVP with his enormous number of receiving yards and 4 touchdowns. In fact, it looks like he's had 4 touchdowns each game, so he's got 8 touchdowns already, and it's only week 2.
Yep.
And he's nearly 1,000 yards on the season as well.
Yep. So I mostly looked at a few players this week more than anything else. The Gunslingers running back certainly looked pretty good as well. He got 250 rushing yards this week, which was very impressive too. Couple of fumbles, but hey, who doesn't mind a few fumbles if you're going to?
If you're going to get 36 carries in the game, you're probably going to fumble the ball a little bit.
Exactly.
There's a suitably manly performance from running back Manly.
Indeed. Those were my standout sort of picks from the GFL.
Okay. The Atlantic, a mixed bag of results this week. Nick, where would you like to start?
Well, I'd like to not start with my game because we were awful this week. I will state that. I thought the Generals and Islanders game was a pretty nice game. Sort of 2 teams have been talked about as teams that could potentially, at least get a wild card slot. The Generals have been fairly unfortunate with their start to the season, facing both the Islanders and the Stallions, which is by no means any sort of easy. And I think they're both away games as well, which is certainly not an easy start to the season.
Yeah, they just couldn't get a drive going here, right? That's the
no.
They're struggling to get enough yards on the board on either side, of either rushing or passing, and only 6 first downs.
Yeah, indeed. They look like they really struggled, and as I say, maybe it's a tough start to the season for them, but they looked on paper to be a team that could challenge for wildcard spots. So that'll be a tough tough loss to take it on.
I think if I remember in my pre-season analysis, I had them going deep into the playoffs.
Yeah, I vaguely remember. I want to say the predictions put them at something like 7-3, around that figure, if I remember correctly. And Brighton, don't get me wrong, Brighton are always there or thereabouts, and their passing game is very good. So you're always going to get a good game with Brighton. I mean, I only squeaked past them last week, but
I had the Generals at 9-1 in my prediction.
Based on training camp reports.
So you're saying you're wrong already, 2 games in. I joke.
I'd like to imagine that I'm in the same sort of position of being a playoff contention team that's had some unfortunate losses to start the season, but we just lost to the Blues, so we'll see.
That was another good game to focus on, actually, the Blues Redcoats. I'm sure Conrad will know far more about that game than I do. But I don't think the Blues can be written off as a bad team at all. Like they did well last season, and they lost the first week to the Sonics, who we might get onto their game later, the Sonics and Spitfires game. But the Sonics certainly look like the real deal this season. So I don't think that the Blues were necessarily bad in week 1, so to speak.
Yeah, our red zone performance was not good, and you never want to be in a position where you're looking at your 3 turnovers and the opposition's 0 turnovers. That's not a good place to be. And to be honest, we're not saying that is just bad luck. That is good defense from the Blues, because those are pretty much all forced fumbles. So they got a lot of good experienced tacklers who just kept ripping the ball off us, which we couldn't really come back from that and string some decent drives together. So very good defensively from the Blues, and hopefully we can get back into it again next week. We certainly haven't written off the season yet, but 0-2 is a bit of a hill to climb.
Okay, did you say you wanted to look at the Spitfire Sonics?
Yeah, I mean this is probably the game that everyone wanted to know the result of. It gives us all a good picture of certainly where the MFC is. The Spitfires normally around 9-1, 10-0. Beat the Redcoats last week. The Sonics dispatched the Blues last week fairly convincingly, and I think this game goes a long way to show how strong the Sonics are this season. I mean, 30 first downs against the Spitfires is quite a number to look at, and by no means was it easy, but they put up a lot of yards to go alongside that. So it's a real big marker early on in the season as to who will be challenging come the playoffs.
Yeah, what you normally tend to see from the Sonics is that they do well, but they're not usually one of the top seeds, and typically it comes unstuck for them in the postseason. But this kind of performance is obviously very encouraging, because the Spitfires have just come off the back of a conference game, and it starts to make you think, well, look, if the Sonics can win pretty convincingly. I know 10-point margin doesn't seem huge, but if you look at the yardage, you look at the performance of both their pass and their run game, it's going to be hugely encouraging for Coach Hose. That he probably thinks now this is the chance maybe to really make a deep playoff run and start to think about, can I get an Atlantic Bowl?
Yeah, definitely.
And the key to me here is, I think if the Spitfires managed to get a little more out of their running game, this would have been a lot closer game. I haven't looked into the teams in depth enough to know whether that's just a weakness of the Spitfires or a strength of the running defense of the Sonics. The answer is probably somewhere in the middle of both. But what we've seen from a lot of the teams we've looked at is, if you can have a nice mix of run and pass, even if one's stronger than the other, it really helps, because it forces the other team to have to game plan against 2 different zones. If you only have to game plan against a single zone, you can just stance everyone up to the wazoo, and it makes you very, very easy to stop unless your players are all ridiculous level. Conrad, any highlights from the GFLA that you wanted to look at?
No, I'm pretty happy with those games, actually. I mean, obviously the Snow Bears won convincingly again. I say obviously. I mean, it seems to indicate they haven't lost much of a step. Perhaps a little bit underwhelming from the Razorbacks. You've got to be afraid, of course, of the Snow Bears. This is a legitimate concern because the transition from Coach Carl to Coach Elkins has been relatively smooth, and it seems they're not going anywhere. The big threat of Rames is still there. The big threat of Reed is still there. They haven't aged into oblivion because they're still putting up big numbers.
I wouldn't read a lot into the Razorback side. I did some trading with Dan in the postseason, in the off season, and I think the Razorback took a big hit to their team. So I think they're in not a nuclear rebuild, but they're definitely on a bit of a wane from the powerhouse they historically have been, which does bode well for me being in their division. From my side, the scary result here was seeing the Nighthawks putting up 62 points against the Aztecs, who I play the Aztecs this week. If I can have a similar performance against them or better, it gives me a better understanding of whereabouts my team is. Being parachuted into a team, I think my roster is very strong this season, but I don't know what the rest of the league is like. So I'm hoping knowing how well or how badly I do against the Aztecs this week will give me an idea of how lofty my ambitions are for trying to push for a deeper playoff run.
The Aztecs are always an interesting one because their defense doesn't always look like it's there, but their offense can still put a lot of points on the board. I mean, they've got quality quarterback and wide receiver combo, if I remember correctly, and it goes a long way to helping them out in games, but they just concede too many points, and it'll be interesting to see how that develops throughout the season. One more thing I will say before we move on from the A is the Anacondas running back Perry at age 13 ran onto the field this week and was averaging 10.5 yards per carry.
Did you say age 13?
Yeah, I believe so.
That's an impressive
variety. Have a look. Roster.
He's certainly very old. You know that.
Age
there we go.
13.
There we go.
What a hero.
A tribute runs with Zimmer frame.
And still has beautiful hair.
Which, unfortunately, in that photo does look like a wig.
Yeah, I think that needs to be noted because that was quite a performance. But I think Clay didn't necessarily game plan for the run too heavily, so it's probably helped out a little bit on that front.
Let's have a look at this. Let's have a quick look at the sheets. Defense. He gave up the run flat, but kept the run line. Yeah. He's respected it a little bit, but yeah, it wasn't the biggest setup. And he was running a 4-2. Okay, let's go look at the Big Sky. So, Conrad, any highlights from the Big Sky this week?
I mean, I don't necessarily need to call out a game, but of course we have to call out our man, the amazing running back Tripson of the Swarming Giant Hornets, who just keeps catching balls. Not quite as many as week one, where he got 400 receiving yards, but he's still going about his business. And this time he has got another 12 receptions for 144 yards with a touchdown, a stat line that any split end would be quite happy with. And yeah, if he can keep up that kind of performance, he will lead the passing attack of the Hornets by himself.
We like to see these comments of a dominant Rasmussen, but we all know that in any game with the Giant Hornets in, Tripson is the guy that's everyone has to watch.
Yeah, I mean, of course they didn't win, and he by himself, Tripson didn't produce the win. But surely he will be back again, and we can only imagine how many yards he's going to have by the end of the season.
Disappointed by his -1 yards rushing, so must do better.
He's not a running back; he's a receiver playing in the wrong shirt.
Either way, it's still a very, very impressive running back performance. I think.
Nick, any games or stats you wanted to pull out?
Let's see. The game, I think. Let's see. Is it the Patriots?
There's a tie.
Yeah,
A
that's the one.
letter-spotted tie.
That was that looked like a real close game when I was looking through the games from the Big Sky, and a bit of everything in the game really. A few turnovers, passing game, rushing game, obviously a tie, and a bit of overtime. Yeah, it had a bit of everything in this game, and it's quite an enjoyable one to look through.
Okay. Conrad, anything else to pull out from the Big Sky?
No, I feel bad for the Titans who lost again, but it's hard to read too much into form at this stage of the season. You know, things are still coming together.
Didn't the Titans make the big mistake of being against the powerhouse known as Coach Bate though?
Yeah, that is true. I think Coach Bate is really like enjoying his new home of the Big Sky. So it might be that he's well motoring by now.
Hey. Now, the league that everyone has been waiting for. I think we should go straight in to the Arctic Badgers game.
Why are we doing that?
It is, of course, Stromwatch. But I thought we'd just point out before we even get to Stromwatch that the Arctic Badgers have just put up a rather disappointing 0 passing yards.
I mean,
They've got to get the ball to Strom somehow.
I think the limelight has gone to Strom's head, so they're just not going to pass it anymore.
If you just put Strom in at quarterback, he'll run the ball. Easy. You've heard of empty backfield? Well,
Wildcat, new formation for the Arctic Badgers only.
I mean, unfortunately, after his tremendously exciting performance that drew our attention to him of, what was it, 5 touchdowns and 4 fumbles, or vice versa, he's only got 1 touchdown here and no fumbles. So, you know, maybe the excitement is over. And even worse, he's been injured.
Maybe the excitement is over. It's MVP. It says it right there.
Most valuable player. Fact.
But yeah, more concerningly, he's injured. He's hurt his elbow, although apparently the post-game comments suggest that he's just going to run it off.
Yeah, the coach has told him to run it off. So we'll continue with Stromwatch next week. Fingers crossed.
Yep. Oh, right.
I'm now a huge Arctic Badgers fan, by the way. So.
I'd say one of the best things about the Arctic Badgers is that the GMs always put something up every year encouraging people to pay their subscription fees, and it's called Race to Subscribe. And Jason Race presumably is panicking because he's like, why are you telling me to subscribe?
Oh dear. Nick, any other games to look at?
Let's kick things off with the Thunderbirds, who what's the numbers don't necessarily make it look close. The stats actually make it look a lot closer. With the Bullets actually getting more yards and equal number of first downs with the Thunderbirds. The Thunderbirds, of course, as everyone knows, haven't lost since season 28, I think it was in the regular season. So someone actually putting some yards on them, and all right, the scoreboard doesn't suggest it was close, but the numbers suggest it was close, and maybe they'll lose a game this season in the regular season. You never know.
Conrad, anything you wanted to take a look at?
No, I think I'm happy once I've done Stromwatch. Although I noticed that rather tragically, there's a shutout game in there as well, where the Spartans scored a big fat 0. I think they need to hang their heads in shame about that offensive performance, where they set a team record of 15 punts.
That's a record you want to set once, and that's it. You want to set it in the first game you ever play. That's it. Oh, right, on to the Delta. So
we'll leave this one for you. You know everything about the Delta.
I do know everything about the Delta at all. So some interesting games to pick up from here is we'll start off with the upset of the week. The Fury are historically a very, very difficult team to beat. the Plainsfield Colts only won their first franchise division title last season's the first time they won their division. Forsbrook were, or still might be, a strong favourite to go deep into the playoffs, and Coach Brown pulling off an upset victory here is something that a lot of people are talking about. If it was, yes, 7 points isn't the biggest margin, but the difference in yardage is quite big, and usually a game involving the Fury wouldn't have this discrepancy in yardage.
Yeah, does Jeff Brown do the Delta Meteor? I'm not up to speed with that.
He is the co-host with Lee.
Clearly, he's been picking up some tips in his time in the Meteor and has put them to good use here in this game.
Most definitely. And Jeff was talking down his team at the start of this season as well.
I think Coach Collins would be furious with his kicker though as well. I believe missed three field goal attempts.
Yardage,
including 20, a 23-yard.
Yeah, the 42 and the 50 I get. The 23-yard one, yeah, that should be him.
Something to note that they did miss a few field goal attempts there.
Where else did I want to look at in here? I had one a minute ago and I completely lost it. Come back to me. Does anybody else have a game they wanted to look at from here? Fun stat that pulled out.
I thought the Lone Stars looked like they had a pretty good game this week.
Yes, I think that's actually the game I want to spell out. The Lone Stars perennially a winning coach, perhaps the winningest coach. As we've spoke about in the Atlantic with the Stallions previously, Coach Sanford is a very strong coach. The Cougars, interestingly, last season people wrote them off for quite a bit, and they managed to beat expectations at every single juncture. We all think they're on the rise. I think Coach Hoff tries to play down his team a little bit, but this is definitely a statement win from the Lone Stars, who I'm fairly confident calling at this point will be making their way to the bowl.
Yeah, I thought it was really impressive from the Lone Stars when I was looking through games earlier. I thought on paper, this game looked like it maybe should be closer than 15-45. So to put that big marker down early on in the season is quite impressive.
Quarterback's put up 138 yards with his legs and 2 touchdowns. What's his QST? Is he 60-20-20?
It's just Aaron's one.
Vector.
I believe he is a scat back.
60-20-20. There we go.
Yeah.
And is that can we nip into the play-by-play and see, is that scrambling away from pressure, or is that just lots of bootlegs?
I think it's bootlegs.
The naked bootleg. There's a few of those. It's great when you get sacked and you lose no yards.
Bootleg, naked bootleg. I don't know why he takes his jersey and pads off on the field. It seems a weird play. Yeah, they are mainly bootlegging.
I mean, it's cool when that stuff works. It's a dual threat offensive weapon, right? Quarterback that can run or pass. It's very modern NFL, but not very 80s. But
indeed.
Any other games people wanted to look at from the Delta?
The Sun Blazers quarterback was quite impressive this week.
Okay, and then after that, we'll look at the Toilet Bowl as well.
So he was it 411 yards doesn't sound all that out there, but sacked 7 times, but still managed to get 5 touchdowns and a quarterback rating of 141 was quite an impressive feat for a quarterback, I thought, this week.
Yep, and Kendall's doing his QB experiment here of trying to play around with, I think his ideal quarterback's like 20, 40, 40.
It's cool. It's always fun when you get to do that.
The other game I want to talk about is the Mariners Massacre, which, if I look at the preview,
wasn't that much of a massacre.
Even one of the coaches called it the toilet bowl. Unfortunately, Coach Owens hasn't had the most attention to pay to the Delta over the last few seasons, so team hasn't been doing particularly well. Nathan also came into the Mariners at the start of last season and completely gutted the team out as it needed a rebuild from scratch. It is a team that a nuclear rebuild was an option that was needed because it just hadn't been coached well for a while. Seeing the Mariners come back to actually put up a decent team and seeing the Massacre starting to compete again is very good for the game of showing how quickly, with a little bit of effort, you can actually turn a team around, and it's good to see the Massacre breaking the duck egg early this season.
The Rapiers in the A also show that turning the team around isn't like a 3 or 4 season thing, but they've started to show this week. I think you played them, didn't you, this week, Lee?
Yes.
And they actually put up some points and looked reasonable for a team that last season didn't look so good.
Yeah, people were expecting me to cakewalk that game. When I was doing my game planning for it, I actually thought it was going to be a lot tougher than it was. I was confident I was going to win, but I wasn't expecting a blowout.
One of the things about going into a team that's an absolute dog is that a lot of people don't expect anything from you. So it can be actually quite advantageous to sort of, effectively, you've got a clean slate. People just assume that you're a walkover win. And if you just put a couple of ingredients in there, you can quite early on surprise people. I probably had a more successful season than I expected at the Redcoats, because you have, first of all, you have the schedule of a 1-9 team or something similar, where you're going to get lots of easy opponents. Plus, also, everyone just assumes you're bad. So if you put one useful offensive player in there.
And also because people see they're playing against Coach Conrad W. and they go, "Phew, it's Williams, not Wickham."
Yeah, exactly.
Right, on to the Empire. Nick, where would you like to start?
I'd like to start with Jacksonville, if possible, please. Jacksonville High Hunters.
High Hunters. Okay.
Now, the main reason for this one was someone convenient. When we shouted out people to tell us players to watch, we got told to watch the High Hunters quarterback, who is Postman Pat. Now,
apparently he always delivers.
He certainly felt the pressure this week, and he did not deliver, I'm afraid.
No, he delivered it to the opposition with a lot of interceptions.
Yeah, Pat did not have a good game this week.
Confirming the name.
The Tomahawks had look. The number of receivers in this game is quite something in itself. But, we'll have to keep an eye on Postman Pat, but this week he definitely didn't deliver the goods, I'm afraid. But we will keep an eye out on him, because always like a good few names thrown about for us to keep an eye on players, and I'll have to keep an eye on him and see whether he does deliver next week, because the pressure is on now, Pat.
But he is cool under pressure.
He certainly wasn't this week.
Nick, any other games?
The Thundering Herd. Now, I think we looked at them last week. And they had a massive scoring game last week. I think it was 42-49. Well, this week they went one better, 49-52. Now, if you like points and you like touchdowns, the Thundering Herd is where you want to be. Like, look at that. 670 70 yards, excluding penalties. I mean, and that's a nice combination of rushing and passing as well. So they are definitely a team that are exciting and one to follow if you like to see touchdowns and points on the board. Then yeah, and is it Delorney, their wide receiver, 381 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns as well. It's impressive stuff.
Conrad, anywhere you'd like to take a look at?
I mean, as I've probably said before, the Empire is a league that I'm still trying to get into and figure out, who are the teams to watch, who's going to produce an exciting game. I certainly like that performance from the Thundering Herd for all the points they put up. I mean, the Red Bulls are supposed to be pretty good, right? And certainly the 41-6 scoreline suggests that they're in a good spot right now. Coach Fisher's been around for a while and knows what he's doing. I think they certainly. It's a funny one because the number of yards are not really that different, but I assume they basically pulled their game over rate in by the fourth quarter, because they'd already, once you sail out to that kind of an enormous advantage in points on the board, you normally will find that actually the rubber band mechanics of gridiron kick in a little bit, and you find it harder and harder to score additional points. So basically, their starters would have been in the showers by the end of the first half, and after that, it's just carry on.
Anything else from the Empire?
Yeah, the only other things I'd point out were the Russians put their second win on the board. Their running back looked pretty strong this week. The team on the whole was fairly average, I think, last season, but they started the season with a big win this week and a win against the Lions, who I'm not sure whether the Lions are rebuilding or not, but they've lost again this week, and maybe that confirms that. But,
there's some pretty horrific quarterback ratings there.
If you get an average of 10.5 yards per carry from your running back, you don't need a quarterback. Just run it every down.
It's true.
I think really what we need to say here is that the Amethyst Russians need to watch out when they face the Quartz Americans. They're going to be done.
I just hope that game's going to be a snower game.
The other team that I did like the look of this week were the Jaguars.
Sorry, this is an American football sim. Jaguars.
Or Jaguars Patriots. I mean, come on. Who doesn't want to? Yeah. Maybe.
Oh, there's the logo. We've got a logo problem. The Patriots have got a logo problem. It's a white square on the helmet.
It could be intentional.
I mean, with this game, the Patriots finished last season with a far superior record, if I remember correctly. So the Patriots were expected to win, but the Jaguars running back Cameron put up 271 yards and got 3 touchdowns, and I think their cornerback Edwards got 4 interceptions, something like that. I thought all around that was a pretty impressive display from the Jaguars, even if they did lose. So they're definitely a team to keep an eye on if they can fill some gaps in the defense and pick up a few more yards maybe on the offense. There's 2 turnovers to 4. So, all right, they probably need to do a little bit more work, but they look like the basis of a team that could well do something this season.
Yeah, at the very least, they've broken the Empire record for longest player name with Wairia Hargreaves, who's got a hyphen in there somewhere. Which college is responsible for him? Is that a college term, or is that the Jaguars themselves?
Junkyard Jaguars roster.
I will say having the Jaguars and Jacksonville in this league makes it very confusing from time to time. Not as confusing as the Washington game this week.
Of course, it's Bone.
Bone season 24. There you go.
More beautiful there.
Anything else from the Empire?
I think I'm all good with that one.
Okay. One of the comments we got on our video from last week was the coaching emphasis and the options on coaching. Game prep and coaching emphasis, they're the ones. Game preparation is one I can talk about a little more, as the coaching emphasis is still one I'm playing around with. I'm playing around with a few different options this season across my teams. Coaching emphasis, I actually do have a spreadsheet that I put the numbers into every week to tell me how much effect it makes. I found if you've got a key game against a rival at home, it makes a huge impact on levels. And when I've made the playoffs, I made a deep playoff run a few years ago with the Jets. The only thing that kept me going in the playoffs was putting all of my CPs a week in there. And I was getting with a youngish team about 2.5 levels of player for those 20 CPs a week, which meant I wasn't getting permanent pops, but it did really help my team push into the playoffs. Conrad, Nick, do either of you use the game preparation at all ever?
Yeah, I'll freely admit that I've never done it since the rule was introduced. I've always just been thinking, well, I get pops on my players and don't worry about this stuff. But equally well, it's probably something that I should have spent more time thinking about the realistic impact on some key games that it could make. Because there is always these games, right? Particularly when your schedule, a lot of it's all kind of set before you even start the season. You've got games that you're heavily favored in. You've got games where you're heavily disfavored, and there might be a few key ones where it can make a huge difference. Between are you a playoff team or not a playoff team, or what's your seeding in the playoffs, or indeed are you still alive in the playoffs? So yeah, it's you've probably inspired me to have another look at it.
Nick,
I'm similar to Conrad. I haven't really used it and haven't looked at it. Don't know whether that's down to laziness or me. It's just the way I play the game. I don't really use spreadsheets and stuff. I just tend to do the things I want to do and how I want to do them, which has led me to, not pay so much attention to those sort of rules and what have you, and focus more on making sure the team itself works, which is a bigger issue currently than anything else.
With the coaching emphasis, historically, I would try and get my 3 or 4 points into injury awareness and fitness as quickly as I could. Doing some more reading, I found some more subtleties with the trying to get 7 or 8 points into things like strength or athleticism, into especially offense and defense quickly. By week 7 to get those extra levels on the offensive and defensive lines if you have the correct QST players in place. Do you guys have a strategy there, or are you all on the injury and fatigue prevention?
Injury awareness I'll do for special teams, just because they're always getting beaten up. I think that what I would normally, when I was primarily a rushing team, I would put more emphasis on fitness because I'd be worried about fatigue on the offense. If you're running all these long, grindy drives with lots of the same players on the pitch, you're doing all these, like, I've done a 4-yard run, another 4-yard run, another 4-yard run, the clock is getting eaten up and you're worried about fatigue, then I would do more fitness. I think now actually I do more athleticism on offense and defense to try and get a bit more out of the passing game and to try and get a bit more out of stopping the passing game, because I see so many matches where I need to complete passes or my opponent's doing short zone again, and I'm confident enough anyway in my run defense, so I try and tweak it a bit. But yeah, I think you can vary it based on where you think your needs or gaps are.
Yeah, I tend to mostly just be on the injury awareness and the fitness levels of things. And I tend to not have too many different formations, so helping out there makes a little bit of difference. But it's mostly where I tend to focus things, tactics sometimes, but usually I'm just on the injury awareness and fitness levels.
Okay, has anybody got any parting comments before we wrap this one up?
Good luck to everyone in week 3. We're still a long way away from seeing what the playoff picture looks like. So have fun and put up some yards and find some fun players for us to look at.
Okay, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Good boy from me. I'm watching you, Pat.